The courtroom smelled of rain and brass polish, the scent of ceremony trapped inside consequence. Reporters filled the benches like vultures in tailored suits, pens poised. Every flashbulb echoed off the mahogany walls, slicing through the silence like small detonations. At the defense table sat Captain Rachel Lee, hands clasped tight, her uniform immaculate, her eyes anything but. Across the aisle sat General Peter Lee, retired, her father. Silver hair, iron jaw, medals lined like a moral inventory. He didn't look at her, not once. The prosecutor cleared his throat, his voice crisp, rehearsed. Captain Lee, on the morning of April 19th, during Operation Falcon's Gate, you filed a mission report stating Private Dean Carter was KIA. Subsequent evidence suggests that report was falsified. You cost the Army a man, and the unit its honor. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Rachel didn't blink. The sound of rain against the high windows was steady, merciless. Her father shifted in his seat, his voice low but caught by a nearby microphone. She dishonored the name. The phrase spread through the press row like gasoline meeting flame. One reporter scribbled, "General disowns daughter in tribunal." Rachel heard it. Everyone did. But when the judge asked, "Captain Lee, do you wish to respond?" she lifted her chin and said the only sentence that mattered. "That soldier isn't dead." The prosecutor frowned. "Excuse me?" Rachel's voice didn't rise, didn't tremble. "Private Dean Carter. The man you're calling dead, he's alive. He's outside this room." The courtroom froze. 5 months earlier, Rachel had been standing knee-deep in sand and chaos. Her convoy had hit a tripwire IED outside Kandahar, fire eating the horizon. She'd heard Carter's voice over the comms, screaming for help. Pinned under wreckage, heat building toward explosion. Command said hold position. Her instinct said move. She broke protocol, dove back into the wreck, and dragged him out seconds before detonation. The blast flipped the Humvee and burned half the comms log. When the smoke cleared, her CO, Colonel Marcus Hill, was shouting in her face, "You disobeyed a direct order." "I saved a man's life." "You jeopardized the mission." 2 hours later, the report was filed, signed by Hill, countersigned by her, stating Carter was killed in action. She'd refused to sign until Hill said, "You'll never see another command if you don't." The family name won't survive another scandal. That last part wasn't a threat. It was a knife. The gavel struck, snapping her back. The judge's voice echoed through the hall. "Captain Lee, the prosecution will present evidence of falsified data entries, tactical negligence, and breach of chain of command." Her lawyer, Major Grace Park, whispered, "Keep your eyes forward. Don't react." But Rachel's eyes drifted anyway, to the man in the front row who had given her everything except faith. General Peter Lee, third generation, West Point graduate, war hero, mythmaker. When she enlisted, he'd handed her his old dog tag and said, "You carry this name now. Don't drop it." She hadn't. He had. Now his hands rested on his cane like judgment carved into wood. The prosecutor projected mission logs on the screen, timestamps missing, coordinates altered, data scrubbed. "These entries, Captain, were made under your clearance code." Rachel didn't deny it. She'd made them, not to deceive, but to correct. To protect Carter's record, the soldier they'd all left for dead. The prosecutor leaned in. "Why alter the report if not to conceal misconduct?" She met his gaze. "Because truth is sometimes the only thing left standing when orders fall apart." A murmur again. The judge struck his gavel once. Grace Park whispered, "You're losing them. They need proof, not poetry." Rachel's lips tightened. Proof is coming. Outside, thunder rolled like a memory trying to return. During recess, her father cornered her in the hallway, the corridor lined with flags and framed citations of men he called brothers. He spoke without turning to her. "You should have pled guilty. Saved what's left of our dignity." "Whose dignity, Dad? Mine or yours?" He turned then, eyes cold steel. "You falsified a report." "I fixed a lie." You defied command. I followed conscience. He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a growl. You don't get to redefine honor, Rachel. You carry it or you lose it. She smiled, small and tragic. I didn't lose it, Dad. I just stopped pretending it was yours to define. He looked like she'd slapped him. Then he said the one thing he'd rehearsed for years. You were supposed to elevate this family name. Instead, you dragged it through the mud. She answered quietly, Mud's where soldiers bleed, Dad. Not on podiums. He walked away without another word. Hours stretched. The press speculated. The hashtags multiplied. By day 3, Rachel's face had become a symbol of disgrace, a cautionary tale on military forums. Her father gave interviews outside the courthouse saying, if she were my soldier, I'd court-martial her twice. Grace Park told her, you need a miracle. Or a witness. Rachel smiled faintly. Same thing sometimes. That night in her hotel room, she opened her mother's last letter, the one she kept folded inside her uniform pocket. It read, when the truth costs everything, pay it anyway. The world doesn't need more decorated liars. She slept with that letter under her hand. The morning of the verdict, the rain hadn't stopped. The press called it the trial of blood and name. The judge began reading. This court finds. The doors burst open. Gasps. Reporters stood. A man entered, gaunt, pale, limping on crutches, IV still taped to his arm. Private Dean Carter. He saluted the judge, voice hoarse but firm. Permission to testify, Your Honor. The room erupted. The judge pounded the gavel. Order! Rachel's father turned slowly, disbelief cracking his composure. Dean's words cut through the chaos like light through smoke. Captain Lee didn't falsify anything. She saved me. She went back into that convoy when everyone else was told to hold position. She pulled me out. She stayed till the blast. If she hadn't, his voice broke, I wouldn't be here. The prosecutor stammered. Private Carter, this is highly irregular. Dean straightened. So was nearly dying, sir. The judge's tone softened. Proceed. Dean described everything. Hill's panic, the radio silence, Rachel's defiance. The truth poured out like water breaking a dam. When he finished, the courtroom fell silent, the kind of silence that changes everything. The prosecutor looked to the bench, defeated. The government withdraws all charges. Rachel exhaled for the first time in months. Dean turned toward her, offered a shaky salute. She rose and returned it, crisp, perfect, unflinching. Then, across the aisle, her father stood. Slowly, deliberately, and saluted too. The cameras flashed, but she didn't look at them. She looked at him, the man who finally understood the cost of his own name. Outside the courthouse, Rachel faces the press, her reputation restored. But the public redemption doesn't heal the private wound. Because what her father doesn't know, not yet, is that the letter from Private Carter had reached his desk weeks before the trial. He had intercepted it and never opened it. The wind outside the courthouse carried that familiar smell, wet pavement and jet fuel, the scent of airports and deployments. Of all the places Rachel had left and all the people who hadn't followed. The press surged toward her as she exited the building, microphones like bayonets. Captain Lee, how does it feel to be cleared? Is it true your father didn't believe you until today? Do you blame the army for turning its back? She stopped at the top of the steps, her uniform catching the weak sunlight. No comment, she said, voice steady. This isn't about me. Then she glanced back at Dean Carter, still pale but standing proud beside the courthouse doors. It's about truth outlasting noise. They didn't understand it, not yet, because they didn't know the noise she'd lived in all her life. Rachel Lee was born into a military dynasty. Her grandfather, Brigadier Harold Lee, had earned his star at Normandy. Her father, General Peter Lee, had commanded armored divisions in Iraq. Dinner conversations were briefings. Birthdays were scheduled between deployments. Silence was a kind of discipline, praise a rare commodity, awarded like medals for perfection. As a child, she learned to march before she learned to dance. When she brought home art projects from school, her father barely looked. When she brought home a perfect report card, he nodded once and said, "Expected." She grew up chasing the smallest signs of approval. He never raised his hand in anger. He didn't need to. His disappointment could flatten a room. Her mother, Elaine, tried to soften the edges. "Your father only knows one language, command," she'd whisper. "Don't mistake it for cruelty. It's just the only way he knows to love." Rachel didn't blame him then. She just thought someday she'd learn that language too. When she graduated high school, Peter Lee handed her an envelope. Inside, a check. "I pulled strings," he said. "You'll start at Georgetown. Political science. Maybe law." She hesitated. "I've already enlisted." His face went white, then red. "You what?" "Army ROTC," she said. "Medical operations. I ship out after summer." He stared at her as if she'd just spat on a family crest. "Do you have any idea what you're throwing away?" "The Lees don't enlist, Rachel. We command." "I'll earn command," she said. "My way." He folded his arms. "You'll come crawling back within a year." She didn't. He didn't speak to her for 2. In the desert, Rachel found the 2 things her father never gave her: purpose and silence. Out there, rank didn't matter as much as grit. She learned to make triage decisions in seconds, to keep soldiers breathing when the medevac was miles out, to lead without fanfare. Her men trusted her. Her father never did. When she was promoted to captain, he sent a single text: "Congratulations. Don't let it go to your head." When she earned her first commendation, he told the press, "My daughter's learning the difference between service and sacrifice." When she came home on leave, he greeted her not with an embrace, but with a correction. Uniforms wrinkled. "It's been a 16-hour flight, Dad." Discipline doesn't clock out. At family gatherings, her cousins spoke in reverence about the Lee tradition of valor. Rachel was the living reminder of what that tradition demanded: perfection or exile. Her mother, aging and tired, pulled her aside one night after dinner. "You don't have to prove him wrong," she whispered. "You just have to live long enough for him to understand." Rachel smiled sadly. "He doesn't do understanding. Only verdicts." Then came Kandahar, and everything that followed. Her convoy ambushed, the chaos, the fire, the choice that broke every rule. After the explosion, she woke up in a field tent with burns across her arms and Colonel Hill's voice echoing in the background. "You disobeyed command. You compromised the chain." She tried to explain that she'd seen Carter alive, trapped, begging for help, that no soldier could stand by. But Hill didn't care about soldiers. Hill cared about reports. He leaned close and whispered, "If you think your last name will save you, you're wrong. It's the only reason they'll bury this." He was right. The army closed ranks around his version. Her father refused to intervene. When she called him from the field hospital, desperate, he didn't even let her finish. "You broke protocol," he said. "That's not courage, Rachel. That's chaos." She didn't call again. After the discharge, she returned home to D.C., only to find the door half closed, figuratively and literally. Her father had told the neighbors she was taking time off. Her mother avoided the topic altogether. At dinner, he poured wine, looked across the table, and said without irony, "You'll never wear that uniform again." She didn't argue. She didn't eat. She just left. The next morning, her name was already trending online. "General's daughter faces court-martial scandal." When reporters asked him for comment, he gave them the quote they wanted: "If she's guilty, she'll face the consequences." The Lees don't hide from accountability. Rachel read it and smiled bitterly. Except when it's your own. Then, one evening, weeks before the tribunal, a letter arrived. Not by courier, not through official channels. Just a crumpled envelope slipped under her door. The handwriting was shaky, the ink smudged by what looked like sweat. It read, "Captain Lee, this is Dean Carter. You saved my life. They're saying you lied, but I know the truth. If you ever need me, I'll be there, even if I have to crawl. Dean." She held that letter until dawn, her thumb tracing the smudge of his signature. The next day, she submitted a witness request. 2 weeks later, it was denied. When she told her father, hoping for even a sliver of support, he said only, "It's not about truth anymore. It's about reputation." She hung up, and for the first time she realized reputation was the family religion. She had just become its heretic. What Rachel didn't know then, what would come out months later, was that Dean had sent a second letter, not to her, to General Peter Lee, a formal testimony, hand-signed, addressed to the general directly, explaining everything: Hill's falsified orders, Rachel's defiance, the rescue. It had reached his desk at the Pentagon 2 weeks before the trial. The aide who delivered it remembered clearly how the general glanced at the envelope, saw the sender's name, and muttered, "I don't need sympathy from ghosts." He tossed it into his drawer unopened. That letter sat there for 23 days gathering dust, while his daughter was crucified by the system he once called sacred. By the time the tribunal began, Rachel's family name was a brand, and she was its burn mark. The tabloids framed her as the general's fallen daughter. Her father's peers whispered he must be humiliated. At home, Elaine tried to reach him. "Peter," she said softly one night, "don't you see what this is doing to her?" "She did it to herself," he said flatly. "No, you did. You taught her to die for an idea, and she lived instead. That's what you can't forgive." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence between them was confession enough. On the last night before the trial's conclusion, Rachel sat alone in her quarters, staring at the polished surface of her dog tag. It reflected a face she didn't quite recognize anymore. Tired, yes, but not broken. Major Grace Park came by, quiet as always. "Dean's not cleared for travel," she said softly. "The doctors won't release him." Rachel nodded. "Then I'll stand alone." "You'll lose." "Maybe. But at least I'll lose clean." Grace hesitated. "You sound like your father." Rachel smiled faintly. "I sound like what he was supposed to be." And now, standing on the courthouse steps after the verdict, the world suddenly wide again, she could feel the cracks in that old armor of her father's pride. When he saluted inside that room, something had shifted. Not enough for forgiveness, but enough for recognition. She looked up at the darkening sky and whispered to herself, "He saw me." Then, softer, "Finally." That night, her father calls. For the first time in years, he doesn't sound like a general, just a man learning to be a father again. But Rachel soon discovers the truth. The letter that could have cleared her months ago had been in his desk all along. That night, the phone rang. It was late, past 2300 hours, and the rain still hadn't stopped. The sound against the window reminded Rachel of rotor blades in the desert, that dull, repetitive thrum of something always coming but never arriving. She let it ring twice before answering. "Captain Lee," she said automatically, the habit of protocol refusing to die. A pause. Then his voice, deep, worn, quieter than she remembered. "Rachel, it's your father." She closed her eyes. For a moment, she said nothing, afraid that any word might shatter the fragile tone in his voice. Not commanding, not condemning, just human. "I saw the footage," he continued. "The boy. Carter, you were right." Rachel leaned back against the desk, staring at the half-packed boxes of her old life. Uniforms, documents, pieces of a career that nearly ended. "I wasn't looking for proof," she said. "Just truth." He hesitated. "I owe you an apology." She almost laughed. Not cruelly, just in disbelief. "You don't owe me an apology, Dad. You owe me belief." That's what you took silence again, rain filling the space between them. "I didn't read his letter," he said finally, voice breaking like old stone. Her heart stopped. "What?" I got it. From Carter. Before the trial. I thought it was just another plea for sympathy. I didn't even open it. The confession came out like static through a bad radio." Rachel sank into the chair. "You had it the whole time?" "I did." "And you said nothing?" "I didn't think it mattered." "It mattered to me," she whispered. It could have saved months. It could have saved my name. He said nothing for a long time. Then, quietly, I was afraid. That word, from him, landed like an earthquake. Peter Lee, the man who'd faced live artillery and bureaucratic minefields without blinking, was afraid. Of what? Losing control? Being wrong? Watching his daughter become something he couldn't shape? Afraid of what? She asked. Of seeing that letter and realizing my version of honor died a long time ago. The next morning, she drove to his house, the same one she grew up in, a museum of medals and silence. The walls smelled faintly of polish and dust. He was waiting at the kitchen table, the letter placed neatly between 2 cups of untouched coffee. Rachel picked it up. The envelope was crumpled, the paper yellowed slightly at the edges. Dean Carter's handwriting, shaky, uncertain, stretched across the front. She opened it slowly. General Lee, if you're reading this, your daughter's about to stand trial for doing what you taught every soldier to do. Protect the weak and honor the truth. She didn't falsify anything. I watched her save me with my own eyes. She disobeyed because she refused to watch me die. I don't know if this letter will change anything, but if you believe in the code you built your life on, then you know this isn't about family name. It's about the kind of soldiers we become when no one's watching. Private Dean Carter. Rachel's hand trembled. Her father's eyes were glassy, fixed on the letter like it was an unexploded shell. I couldn't face it, he said, because if I had, then I'd have to admit that everything I told you about duty was hollow. She folded the letter carefully, sliding it back across the table. You don't have to admit it. Just stop living it. 2 days later, she visited Dean at the military hospital. He was sitting up, a blanket over his legs, a copy of Stars and Stripes on his lap. When he saw her, he grinned, the easy, tired grin of a man who'd made peace with pain. Permission to speak freely, ma'am? He said, mock saluting. Denied, she said, smiling despite herself. You talk too much. He laughed, then coughed. How's the general? Reading his own ghost stories, she said. Good. They talked for hours. About the mission, about his recovery, about everything that wasn't war. At one point, he said softly, You know, when they told me you got charged, I thought, of course she did. She frowned. Thanks. I mean it, he said. Only people who tell the truth get charged in this system. He handed her a folded clipping, his latest medical release. Got one last request, Captain, he said. When I get discharged, I want you there. You'll have to fight me for the front seat of the ambulance, she teased. He grinned. Deal. That night, her father called again. He sounded different, not lighter, but smaller, human-sized. I found something, he said. In your mother's things. Rachel stiffened. Mom's? She wrote a letter before she passed. About you. He read it aloud, voice cracking halfway through. Peter, if she ever falls, don't punish her for it. Just remember, courage looks like defiance when you're standing in the wrong place. He stopped reading. Then, quietly, I was in the wrong place, Rachel. For the first time since she was a child, she believed him. Weeks later, the Army issued a formal apology. Clerical misinterpretation, they called it. A bureaucratic way to erase a public mistake. They offered her a commendation for valor under duress. She declined. When Grace Park asked why, Rachel said simply, Medals are just apologies made of metal. I've had enough of those, Grace nodded. You sound like a general. Rachel smiled faintly. No, I sound like his daughter. When she finally forgave him, on Sunday morning, she drove her father to the hospital. He insisted on coming. Dean was sitting up again, stronger now, his IV gone. When the general entered, Dean straightened immediately, saluting. Sir, he said. At ease, Private, Peter replied, then paused. And thank you. Dean blinked. For what, sir? For reminding me what a soldier looks like. They sat for an hour. No rank, no pretense. Just 3 people bound by a single moment of impossible choice. When they left, her father said almost to himself, I think I understand now why you broke orders. Rachel looked at him. Because rules aren't always right? He shook his head. Because sometimes honor isn't written down. It's lived. A week later, news broke. Colonel Marcus Hill had been stripped of command and reassigned pending investigation. His cover-up, exposed by Dean's testimony and Rachel's data logs, had reached the Department of Defense. He released a statement. No apology, only bitterness. Captain Lee was reckless. She acted emotionally. The Army has no place for sentimental heroism. When Rachel read it, she laughed softly. He's still protecting his story. Her father, standing beside her, murmured, "Then let the story die with him." He put a hand on her shoulder, hesitant but real. "I'm proud of you," he said. She turned to him, uncertain. "For disobeying?" "For knowing when to," he said. And with that, something inside her, something old and sharp, finally began to unclench. 3 months later, Rachel returned to active duty, reassigned to command a humanitarian task unit. Reporters called it the redemption arc of the Lee legacy. Her father refused interviews. Instead, he quietly sent a letter to the Pentagon archives, a personal statement acknowledging his daughter's exoneration and his own failure of faith. He requested that it remain sealed until his death. When she found out, she said only, "That's the first order he's written I can respect." But the true shift came one evening as she visited her parents' old home. The walls were still lined with medals and citations, relics of men who'd fought and won. On the mantel now stood a single new addition, a framed photograph of her, saluting outside the courthouse, the moment after she was cleared. Beneath it, her father had engraved 6 words on a brass plate. "Honor defends truth, not pride." She smiled. Not for the cameras this time, just for herself. When Colonel Hill's hearing begins, Rachel is called to testify. But what starts as closure turns into confrontation, because her father, now reinstated as an advisor, must take the stand too. And for the first time, both Lees will have to defend the same truth, together. The new tribunal wasn't hers this time, but it felt like it. Same cold air, same mahogany panels, same flag rippling faintly in the vented breeze. Only now Rachel sat not as the accused, but as the witness. The nameplate at the center read, "Colonel Marcus Hill, Article 133, Hearing. Conduct unbecoming of an officer. Falsification of reports. Dereliction of command." When she walked in, every camera shifted toward her. The woman once accused now sat in uniform again, stripes gleaming, posture unbroken. Across the aisle, Hill sneered. The expression hadn't changed since Kandahar. Arrogance lacquered with fear. "Captain Lee," the presiding officer said, "you are recalled to testify regarding your previous command under Colonel Hill's unit. Please summarize the circumstances of Operation Falcon's Gate." Rachel stood, hands clasped behind her back. Her voice didn't tremble. "Sir, my convoy was ambushed while providing supply cover. Private Dean Carter was trapped under Vehicle 3. Colonel Hill ordered a retreat. I disobeyed and extracted Carter manually. And the after-action report was falsified under duress." Hill leaned forward. "Objection. Speculative. Overruled," the judge barked. Rachel continued. "I signed the edited version under threat of career termination. My subsequent attempt to correct it was rejected." The words fell like stones. Hill's jaw clenched. His lawyer scribbled frantically. Then came the line that turned every head in the room. "Sir," Rachel said, voice low but clear, "I didn't break the chain of command. I followed the one that still mattered, the moral one." A murmur rippled. One of the judges nodded almost imperceptibly. At the back of the chamber sat General Peter Lee, reinstated as an honorary advisor, suit pressed, medals dimmed by time. For once, he wasn't commanding the narrative. He was witnessing it. His daughter's truth, once buried under his own ego, was now federal record. He took notes slowly, deliberately, as if writing penance instead of policy. When the court called him forward as character witness, even Hill's counsel stiffened. "General Lee," the judge began, You are here to speak to Colonel Hill's leadership conduct during and after Operation Falcon's Gate. Peter adjusted his glasses. Yes, Your Honor. Proceed. He looked directly at Hill. Colonel Hill exemplified the kind of leadership that fears accountability. He weaponized protocol to conceal failure. Hill smirked. With respect, General, hindsight makes cowards philosophers. Peter didn't flinch. And foresight makes cowards commanders. A low exhale passed through the crowd. Half shock, half satisfaction. The general turned toward Rachel, just briefly. Captain Lee upheld the one tradition that truly defines our uniform. Integrity. I once called her a disgrace. I was wrong. The courtroom stilled. Every camera caught it. The general's admission, the daughter's silent nod. After that hearing, the verdict came quickly. Hill was stripped of command, reduced in rank, and dishonorably discharged. But the real punishment wasn't the verdict. It was watching Rachel stand to leave, unshaken, untarnished, the living proof of everything he'd tried to erase. Outside, the press exploded. Lee family redemption complete, one headline read. Another simply said, the name restored. Rachel ignored them all. She wasn't chasing restoration. She'd stopped chasing a long time ago. At the courthouse steps, Dean Carter waited again, leaning on his cane but smiling. He handed her a folded page, the printed verdict. Told you I'd crawl if I had to, he said. She smiled. Next time, just call first. That evening, Rachel and her father walked through the quiet of Fort Belvoir's Memorial Garden. The air smelled faintly of rain and jet fuel, the same scent that had followed her since the first trial. Rows of engraved names gleamed under the low lamps. Her father stopped by a plaque bearing his own unit's motto, Fortis per veritatem, strength through truth. Funny, he said. I must have forgotten what that meant. Rachel didn't answer. She let the silence speak. After a moment, he said softly, I spent 40 years teaching men to follow orders. Not once did I tell them when to break them. She turned. You just did. He looked at her, the same steel in his eyes, but softened now, refracted through shame and pride intertwined. You ever wonder if I was a good soldier and a bad father? Or the other way around? Neither, she said gently. You were just a man trying to win every battle, even the ones you should have surrendered. He gave a weary smile. Then consider this my surrender. They stood for a while, neither saluting, neither speaking, just breathing in the shared quiet of two generations who'd finally laid down arms. A week later, the Defense Department invited Rachel to speak at the annual Honor Symposium, a gathering of officers, veterans, and recruits. The invitation read, Topic, The Future of Integrity in Command. Her father tried to decline on her behalf. You don't owe them a speech, he said. I don't owe them anything, she replied, but I owe it to every soldier who doesn't have a name that protects them. The auditorium was full. 600 officers, senators, cadets. Cameras rolling live. Rachel stepped to the podium, the same steadiness she'd shown in the courtroom now tempered with something deeper. Grace. When I was charged, she began, I thought my uniform was a shield. It wasn't. It was a mirror. It showed me who I really was and who I wasn't allowed to be. She paused, scanning the rows of faces. Her father sat near the front, hands folded. I was raised to believe that honor meant obedience. I learned that honor actually begins where obedience ends, when you stand up for what's right, not for what's easy. Silence. Then a single clap. Then a wave of them, rising, echoing, filling the room. Her father stood last, not because he hesitated, but because he wanted to remember this sound. The sound of truth earning its own applause. Backstage, he waited for her, holding a small velvet case. Inside was his old campaign medal, the one he'd received in Iraq, tarnished at the edges. It was yours all along, he said. She shook her head. No, Dad, it was always ours. You just forgot to share it. He smiled faintly. You've got your mother's way of turning knives into lessons. Rachel laughed softly. She had to. They walked out together into the fading light. The building behind them hummed with leftover applause, the kind that lingers after purpose is fulfilled. Later that night, back at his home, Peter stood in his study, the same desk, the same drawer where Dean's letter had sat unopened. He opened it now, not to read it, but to place something else inside. The medal Rachel had returned. He folded the envelope over it, sealed the drawer, and whispered to no one, "Let the truth keep it." When Rachel left that night, she looked back through the window. Her father wasn't a general anymore. He was just a man, sitting in the light of his own reckoning. Months later, a new crisis unfolds. Dean Carter is nominated for the Medal of Valor and insists Rachel attend the ceremony. But what she doesn't know is that her father has arranged to present the medal himself, turning what should be a simple ceremony into one last test of what honor truly means when family, forgiveness, and public duty collide. The Pentagon Hall of Honor gleamed under floodlights, marble floors polished until they mirrored every medal, every regret. Rachel stood at the edge of the stage, her hands clasped behind her back, trying to steady her breathing. She wasn't used to the quiet before applause. She was used to the quiet before orders. Across the aisle, she spotted Dean Carter, no longer the gaunt patient from months ago, but a soldier restored. His uniform was crisp, his shoulders squared, his cane gone. Only the faint scar along his jaw betrayed the wreckage they had both survived. He smiled when he saw her. "Captain Lee, you clean up nice." She smiled back. "Private Carter, you stand straighter than most generals I know." Then she saw who stood beside the podium, General Peter Lee, her father. The realization hit like a slow punch. He wasn't just attending. He was presenting the Medal of Valor. She froze. Dean leaned closer. "You didn't know?" She shook her head, barely whispering, "No." The room filled with senior officers, journalists, and families of the fallen. On the far wall hung a banner, "Valor is truth in motion." Rachel swallowed hard. The irony was too thick to breathe. The announcer's voice echoed through the hall. "Today we honor Private Dean Carter for acts of extraordinary heroism in combat and for the courage to uphold truth when silence would have been easier." Applause rose, warm and thunderous. Dean stepped forward, his chin high. Then the announcer continued. "The medal will be presented by General Peter Lee, retired, in recognition of both valor on the battlefield and integrity beyond it." The applause dimmed into a hush. The old general walked forward, medals glinting, posture rigid with something halfway between pride and guilt. Rachel's pulse thundered. She didn't know whether to stay or walk out. Grace Park's voice from months ago echoed in her head. "Stay where the truth can see you." So she stayed. Her father stood at the podium. His hands shook slightly, not from age, but from the weight of what he was about to say. "Private Carter," he began, voice rough, "the Medal of Valor is awarded for saving lives under fire. But this one—" He paused, looking directly at Rachel. "This one is for saving something even harder, integrity." The crowd stilled. He continued. "Months ago, this soldier risked everything to tell the truth about a mission that went wrong. And in doing so, he reminded a nation, and a father, what courage really looks like." Dean swallowed hard. Rachel's eyes burned. Her father motioned for the aide to bring the medal, the golden star gleaming under the lights. He pinned it to Dean's chest, then stepped back and saluted sharply. Dean returned the salute, then, to everyone's surprise, turned toward Rachel and said, "Permission to request a second salute, sir." "For the officer who carried me out." A ripple of murmurs swept the hall. Her father looked at her. The silence between them was heavy, electric, alive. Then he turned back to the audience. "Bring her up," he said. Rachel froze. "Sir, that's an order, Captain." Slowly, she stepped forward. The applause was soft at first, then built, like a wave rising out of collective breath. She stopped beside Dean. Her father's hand trembled as he took out a smaller ribbon from his pocket. Not protocol, not official, something personal. "This was mine," he said. "Awarded in Fallujah for leading a convoy under fire. It meant less to me every year I forgot what it stood for." He handed it to her. I want you to have it. Her throat tightened. She whispered, You don't have to. I do, he said, because you carried what I dropped. Then, in front of the cameras, in front of the country, General Peter Lee saluted his daughter. Crisp, perfect, public. Every soldier in the room rose. The sound wasn't applause this time. It was the synchronized snap of hundreds of salutes, a chorus of standing steel. The public reaction? Stand. When the ceremony ended, the crowd surged forward. Reporters, officers, civilians. But Rachel slipped through the back corridor, needing air. The marble halls felt like memory, echoing, endless, unforgiving. Outside, the night was cold and quiet. Her father found her there, standing under the flagpole where floodlights painted the stars red and silver. You blindsided me, she said softly, half smiling. I owed you one, he replied. You didn't have to do that in front of everyone. Yes, I did, because I broke you in front of everyone. She turned toward him. So that's your redemption speech? He shook his head. No, that's your inheritance. They stood side by side, eyes fixed on the flag snapping in the wind. For once, silence didn't divide them. It connected them. Dean approached, metal glinting faintly under the lamplight. I didn't mean to start a revolution, he said, chuckling nervously. Rachel smiled. You didn't. You just reminded the system it still had a heartbeat. Her father nodded slowly and reminded an old general that his daughter's bloodline runs stronger than pride. Dean glanced at them both. So, are we good now? Peter looked at Rachel. Ask her. She exhaled. We're getting there. Dean grinned. Good enough for me. He saluted her one last time, then walked off toward the press vans, the metal catching the last trace of sunset. When they were alone again, Peter reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, her dog tag, the one she'd lost after the Kandahar explosion. Found this in your old duffel, he said. Figured you'd want it back. She took it, fingers tracing the worn edges. It's dented, she said. So am I, he replied. But we're both still standing. She laughed, really laughed, for the first time in years. And under the flag, under the weight of all the things they'd both carried, she whispered, Thank you, Dad. He looked at her, eyes glistening. No, he said. Thank you for proving the name still meant something. Rachel turned toward the flagpole and saluted once more, the wind sharp against her face. Then she said quietly, the words just for him. You protected the name. I protected its meaning. He didn't reply. He didn't need to. His salute was enough. The hall emptied. The press coverage looped across every network. General salutes daughter he once disowned. Valor rewrites the family name. Honor redefined by blood. Rachel didn't watch any of it. She drove out of the city that night, windows down, headlights catching the drizzle that blurred the road into silver. She stopped at a rest area overlooking the Potomac, the river dark and vast. Pulling out her dog tag, she pressed it against the steering wheel and whispered, Some battles you win when you stop fighting. Months later, at Dean's retirement ceremony, Rachel learns her father has submitted a formal request, not for promotion, but for a joint commendation to bear both their names. It isn't about legacy anymore. It's about truth made permanent. The sound of boots on tile echoed down the hallway. Crisp, light, uncertain. Captain Rachel Lee looked up from her desk. The office at Fort Sam Houston was simple. Sunlight spilling through blinds, a flag in the corner, a single photograph of her and her father at the Pentagon ceremony. The young cadet at the door saluted nervously. Permission to enter, ma'am? Rachel smiled. At ease, cadet. Come in before the Texas heat cooks what's left of your confidence. The girl, couldn't have been more than 20, stepped in, eyes darting from the maps to the commendations on the wall. Then she stopped, staring at the framed letter above the flag. Is that real? She asked. The Lee commendation? People say it was the first joint honor ever filed between two family members. Rachel turned her chair slightly, following the cadet's gaze. It's real, she said, but it's not about medals. It's about how two people learned to stop fighting the same war. The cadet tilted her head. You mean your father? Rachel nodded. He believed honor came from winning. I believed it came from telling the truth. Turns out, we were both wrong. It comes from knowing when to stop proving yourself. The girl frowned slightly, absorbing the words like someone tasting something sharp and new. But, ma'am, wasn't he the general who— Rachel interrupted gently. Who disowned me in court? Yes, and the same one who saluted me after. Life's funny like that. The people who break you are sometimes the only ones who know how to mend you. The cadet looked down, a soft flush creeping into her cheeks. My dad says service isn't for women. Rachel's smile softened. Then prove him right by showing him what service really means. The cadet blinked, half confused, half inspired. Yes, ma'am. As she turned to leave, Rachel called out, Cadet? Yes, ma'am. When they hand you your first uniform, don't wear it to please anyone. Wear it to remember who you are without it. The girl smiled and saluted again, this time without trembling. After the cadet left, the office fell back into quiet. Rachel opened the bottom drawer of her desk and pulled out a small, sealed envelope. The handwriting was neat, formal, her own. The envelope was addressed to General Peter Lee, retired. She'd written it the night before his funeral. He had passed quietly, a year after the commendation was approved. Heart failure, the doctor said, but Rachel liked to believe it was simply the body catching up to a soul that had finally laid down its arms. She'd never mailed the letter. She didn't need to. But today, for some reason she couldn't name, she opened it again. Dad, they asked me to write your eulogy. I said no, because words were always our battlefield, and I fought enough of those. But I wanted to tell you this. You were right about one thing. The name does matter. Not because it's ours, but because people will attach their own meaning to it. And I'd rather they see truth than silence. You once told me I'd disgrace it. I think we both learned that disgrace and grace start from the same place, being seen for what we really are. You taught me command. I taught you conscience. Maybe that's how legacy works. A relay, not a rivalry. Your daughter, always, Rachel. She folded it back carefully, the paper thin but uncreased, like something held too often to ever wrinkle. Outside, the sky was turning amber. She stood, stretched, and walked to the window. The flag outside fluttered in the wind, the same one her father had mailed her months before his death. Sometimes she imagined he was in that motion, not as a general, not even as a father, but as the steady part of the world she'd once resisted. The wind didn't judge, didn't command. It simply carried what needed carrying. She whispered, barely audible, You protected the name. I protected its meaning. Now it belongs to everyone who needs it. A soft knock broke the moment. Dean Carter stood at the door, older now, but walking without the cane. A faint smile under the mustache he'd grown. Still pretending you're not famous, huh? He said. She laughed. I'm not famous. You're the one with the Medal of Valor and a book deal. Yeah, he said, shrugging. But you're the chapter everyone skips to. He sat down across from her, eyes landing on the same framed letter. You ever think about taking it down? She shook her head. It's not for me. It's for anyone who walks in here needing proof that broken stories can still end with honor. He nodded slowly. He'd be proud. Rachel looked out the window again. He already was. Just took him 50 years to say it. Dean grinned. That's better than most fathers. They shared a long, easy silence. Two survivors of different battles, bound by one truth. Sometimes the only victory is peace. Later that evening, after Dean left, Rachel locked the office and walked toward the parade ground. The air was cool, the stars beginning to prick the sky. She stood at attention as the bugle call echoed. Retreat. Every soldier around her froze, saluting the lowering flag. She raised her hand too, not out of duty anymore, but out of gratitude. for the father who'd finally learned to salute his daughter, for the soldier who'd crawled back to testify when truth needed legs, for the name that had once been a prison and had become a promise. When the music faded, she whispered the last words her father had ever said to her, the ones she'd never forgotten. "You carried what I dropped." Then softly, she added her own. "And I'll keep carrying it until someone else is ready to lift it higher." The wind caught her hair, and the stars above the base blinked like medals on a vast, invisible chest. Some battles end with medals. Others end with understanding. I used to think honor was earned in war. Now I know it's restored in forgiveness.